Welcome to Gone to Texas, a podcast about AMC's Preacher. My name is Alex, and I have not read any of Garth Ennis's Preacher.
And I'm Nick, and I have read all of Garth Ennis's Preacher.
Today we will be discussing episode 10 of the show titled Call and Response, and while we will not be spoiling any of the comic and by extension any future plot lines of the show, we will be discussing the details of the entire series so far through episode 10, so pause this and go watch the show before you listen to the rest of this episode. You can find more episodes of our podcast at g2tpodcast.com. That's the letter G, number 2, letter T, podcast.com. We're also G2T Podcast on Twitter, and you can send feedback to g2tpodcast at gmail.com to tell us what you think of our show and share your thoughts on AMC's Preacher so we can read them on air, send us corrections, observations, anything regarding Preacher or our podcast, much like our friend Bruce did. Bruce wrote us this week and said, I forgot to write in last week, but that's probably for the best, as it likely would have just been me quoting food court, over and over again. As for episode 9, it seemed like a pretty good setup for the finale, taking things just a little more slowly before the hopefully big bang coming this coming week. Huh. Just a few observations of my own. The reveal of Bern Cassidy took me by surprise. It was built up very similarly to when they first showed Arseface, so I was expecting something darkly comedic, but instead got something kind of messed up and disturbing.
Yeah.
Poor Miles. At least he didn't have to decide between the different shades of khaki now. Very true. There was something hilarious about Kincannon standing on top of his desk and the Fight Club going on that reminded me of an awful season 1 episode of Gotham. Haven't seen it, so.
I've seen some Gotham.
Yeah.
Dipped my toe into Gotham. Didn't like it.
Yeah. You didn't get as far as a Fight Club scene?
No, not that I'm aware of.
All right. I'm still not really invested in the whole Carlos subplot. It feels like the show itself kind of forgot about him for a few episodes, only for him to show up for about 3 seconds this week. Meh. We'll talk about that a little bit in this episode.
Yes, sir.
And then I'm very excited to see what the cowboy gets up to in the finale. We were as well. So he closes out the email saying, I might not be able to write in next week since I'll be out of town and we'll miss the finale when it airs. Anyways, keep up the good work, Bruce. Good news, Bruce. We're going to do a season 1 wrap-up show so you can write in then.
Definitely.
We'd like to hear your thoughts on the season as a whole. So please write us some words. We'll talk about it. And that goes out to everybody else out there, too. We'd love to hear from you what your thoughts on the season as a whole were. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about it with Nick and John and Lance next week. But let's get right into it. We got a very short teaser this week. Basically just shots around Anvil with a radio report about God coming to town and Jesse on the run. We get our first timer of the episode with 17 hours until God comes to town. I liked this scene. Just Jesse sprinting through the street saying hi to Mabel, and she's pointing at him for the cops. I thought it was pretty fun. Just kind of showing us what we knew was going on as of last week.
Yeah.
But we break into Act 1. Tulip races back into town, finds Mose, and gets caught up, at least somewhat, as to what's going on. Finds out that Jesse's over at Donnie's. She shows up at Donnie's after Donnie and his wife kind of get it on like the old days, I guess, as we're led to believe.
Yes.
Donnie's back to normal, supposedly. And Tulip interrupts and finds out that Jesse is willingly staying with them just to kind of duck out on the police. I think we both liked that. It seems funny that Jesse and Donnie kind of mended the fence. And even a little bit later in this episode, we get the explanation from Donnie as to why he's okay with the preacher now and how he saved him. And there's just a shot of Dominic Cooper reacting towards the story against Tulip that just is one of those micro expressions that is so fantastic.
Yeah,
so
that was really good.
That was
very
beautiful.
Pleased with himself in that moment.
Yeah, well, he's kind of pleased with himself, but he also knows that he's like, I've not actually changed anything about Donnie. Like, it to me, the face that he gives Tulip is just kind of like, listen to this crock of crap that's going on right now, because he's just kind of like, Donnie says that I saved him, but he's still just going to be Donnie, and I just thought that was really funny.
Oh, that's interesting. That's not the read I took away from it.
It doesn't. I get the whole please thing, but it seems like he's very aware that Tulip is like, this is a bunch of BS and you know it. So that's what I got out of it. So then we cut to Cassidy locked up in jail, talking with the previous city mascot who apparently gets let out of jail. I don't think we really knew why he was in there. We hear somebody drop some charges against him. Really not.
He says the prairie dog dropped the charges. The
Okay.
other mascot.
So yeah, they're still obviously that.
But they're like lovers. They're like.
Oh, I didn't realize that's who that Cassidy refers to.
Right. Yeah, I mean maybe not. Maybe Cassidy's just. It was very strange. He made it.
Cassidy calls him Pedro.
And he says they need to make up and leave that shit on Brokeback Mountain or something like that. Yeah, I mean, he implies that they're in like a relationship or something. I don't.
Yeah.
This whole. Go ahead. All
right. Yeah. We'll get to more surreal stuff. Sheriff Root, turns out he's interrogating Cassidy about Eugene. That seems to be why he picked him up. He wants to try and get some information out of him since he can't find Jesse. And we realize that Sheriff has learned that Cassidy is a vampire because of his police record that dates back at least to 1922, but it seems like it goes back further than that as well. I thought that was cool. Sheriff Root learned. It's kind of weird that, I don't know. I guess you would think somebody would have questioned that before him. But in this world...
Well, I think the thing about Cassie is he doesn't stay in one place for too long.
Yeah, that's true.
And he's been in Anvil for a while, but only because of Jesse and Tulip and company. So
he's there long enough for somebody to put the pieces
to finally,
together.
and somebody who cares enough because he just seems like just a drunk Irishman. They'd probably be like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah,
just another asshole.
Yeah, fair enough. And then Cassidy goes to take out the sheriff, but he shoots Cass, and then the sheriff gives him a cup of blood to heal. So that's kind of his interrogation
like
technique.
A little snow cone
holder
of blood. It was really funny.
Yep. So that's Act 1. Yeah, we'll get back to the surrealness of everything, I think, unless you want to pause to talk about it here.
Yeah, I mean, just Act 1 in general, I felt like I missed an episode.
Yes.
Like, I did not particularly think that this beginning of this episode was handled very well. It felt like a lot of stuff was just, like they were writing and they were like, oh, shit, guys, we just shot episode 7 and we still haven't figured out how to get to 10. It felt very, like a lot of stuff got accelerated behind the scenes.
Yeah. The main thing to me, I think, everything would be good up until Cassidy being in prison. And I think they still kind of, you can understand why he's there, at least. Like, I think it feels like they were like, oh God, we need to cut this down somewhere. And they compromised and got it down to the 80 minutes that it was after adding in commercials.
Yeah, fair enough.
But I think, I was like, I remember thinking, I was like, did Cassidy end up in jail at some point last week? And then I was like, I don't think so. And then I started putting the pieces together.
Well, there's a lot of exposition.
Yeah.
He tells the sheriff, basically recounts to the sheriff how the sheriff arrested him. And we're kind of like, okay.
Like, why did you do why?
Yeah, and it's kind of a shame because I do get it. I get it. It's probably coming not only from a time perspective, but from a budget perspective.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's fine. It's kind of a shame because it's the only time in this whole season, this whole series so far, I feel like we had lazy writing.
Yeah.
And so it sticks out like a sore thumb. And we're like, and that would be adequate writing on another TV show where we'd be like, okay, that's fine. But for something that's done such a great job of doing really good visual storytelling like this season has done so far, it's kind of a bummer. You're like, oh, I feel a little bit shortchanged.
Yeah.
But it's okay. I just felt the first like 10, 15 minutes of the episode really rubbed me the wrong way. I was like, oh God, this finale sucks. Like,
interesting.
Right off the bat.
All right. More on that in a bit. Act 2, we get Donnie recounting why Jesse came into his care. But then Tulip pulls Jesse outside and he apologizes to her and says he'll do anything for her when Tulip reveals that Carlos is in the trunk of her car. Then we cut back to the flashback of them robbing the bank, and we learn kind of more about their relationship. Tulip is clearly pregnant because they explain that she can't drink beer with Jesse that night. Jesse's got a great mullet, which is fantastic.
Killer mullet.
Yeah. They're
Dog the Bounty Hunter.
Yeah.
Almost.
If it were dark and better. But
he looked like while we were watching it, I was like, he almost looks a little bit more like Jesse from the comics.
Yeah.
He just has this out of control gross hair.
Yep.
But Yeah, it's not even quite the weird, bizarre Jerry curl type thing that he has in the books.
It's like a Jerry curl crossed with like a mushroom cut.
It's really weird.
In like a really weird way.
Undefined. I loved hearing on the Insider podcast that they tried it. They did like several hair and makeup tests with Dominic Cooper to try to get the hair, and I was like, I want to see that. Yeah. Like, let me see those.
It's like a montage in a movie where they get his hair down perfect, and then it just poofs back to what it actually turned out to be in the
state.
end. Yeah. Basically, we get some backstory on Carlos, just a little bit, showing that he kind of got jealous over their happiness because Tulip and Jesse seemed pretty happy at the time. And he basically decides to kind of sabotage the mission by cutting free a security guard, who then Jesse shoots outside in the back. Carlos drives off, as we've seen previously, and Tulip... Essentially, Tulip seems to lose the baby due to the stress of the situation. So, yeah, that's kind of a lot of information about Carlos. And basically, we cut back to current time. Jesse pulls off Carlos's gag to ask why it happened. And he said, "You were happy." And Jesse closes the trunk. Let's come back to Carlos in a minute.
Okay.
We cut back to the massive pool of feces with the pressure relieving man on the phone with his wife.
This is the first time it's been revealed.
Yeah, this is the first time we realize what he's tending to. Yes. In total, because we've gotten a little bit more of his room each time. We've seen his control
room.
We saw the panel, and then we saw the full room, and then finally we're seeing what's in the window that's kind of on the side of the room.
Just acres of shit.
Yep. Lots of liquefied poop.
Which is incredible.
So he's on the phone with his wife, trying to get her to, have some fun that night, and she doesn't go for it. So he's like, okay, whatever.
Have some
fun. So we cut to Cassidy and Root still going at it. Cassidy reveals that Eugene is still alive, probably, but that might not be the good. It could be the good news or the bad news, depending on the way you want to look at it.
That was very well handled.
And then he explained it was an accident, and Jesse wouldn't hurt a kid, not on purpose anyway. Root's just kind of like, well, that's great. That doesn't help me at all. And then Cassidy just kind of goads him a little bit, not on purpose. I think it's the inquisitive nature of Cassidy's brain, just kind of be like, isn't there any part of you that's okay with this?
Yeah.
That you don't know where he is, that he's gone out of your life. And then Sheriff just kind of empties his full 6-shooter into Cassidy and then unlocks the door and lets him go. Yeah. So then Act 3, Jesse and Tulip are arguing about killing Carlos. Jesse doesn't want to do it. Jesse doesn't want to do it. Tulip wants to, obviously. Donnie's reading Gorillas in the Mist in bed next to Betsy.
Gorillas in the Mist. That is so funny.
Such an erudite, that Donnie skank, I think is what they call him. Jesse argues killing Carlos won't bring the baby back, but and Tulip agrees, but she says somebody has to pay. So Jesse starts pulling out a garbage bag, oven mitt, and a gun to go and shoot Carlos in the back of her trunk, but she stops him just because she's doing that thing where she's like, I just wanted to know that you would do it for me, is what it seems to be. It's the thought that counts, is what she says. And so then they decide to let him go, give him some weapons so that they can apparently chase after him and beat the hell out of him. We see him kind of gurgle and saunter off into the night. I'm a little disappointed with Carlos with that entire story. Like, I'm glad that they didn't leave it hanging out there for 3 seasons.
Correct, yeah.
But I'm also kind of sad that it seems very perfunctory. I don't know how much of a real purpose it served other than just to kind of rectify and reunite Jesse and Tulip's relationship. You know?
Yeah, I haven't had a lot of time to really mull it over.
Especially after Bruce's comments, too. Like, last week, he was like, they just kind of forgot about him. I was thinking they wouldn't even come back to it this season up until last week happened. And
yeah, that's true. It does kind of... That is one of the only things story-wise that feels really uneven to me, is that they hit that so heavy in the first 3 episodes or so. Like, yeah. Carlos Carlos did this unforgivable thing, and what is it? And like, it's not even for a good reason. Like, it's it's kind of, I can see why on the page it seemed interesting that he says you were happy, but the way it's executed on screen, it's not. You're kind of like they were happy.
I think
you're a robber. You're all robbers. You're what? They're happy.
I think what's really missing from that is we have no depth on Carlos at all. Like, this is our first time ever really interacting with Carlos. If we would have
well, they seem like they've been working with him in the flashbacks for a while. Like, they knew each other well enough to like joke around and like goof off a little. And even if he had a weird complex and been like, you guys were picking on me all the time, you didn't take me seriously, anything like that, I would have accepted over you were happy.
Yeah.
Like, what the what the shit? Who cares? You're gonna make off with probably a pretty sweet amount of money, and like I don't know, that just rang really false to me. Like it didn't seem to matter.
I agree.
Which is too bad, because all the little teases of the flashbacks are so cool.
They're very
so
cool.
intense, and I'm just like, wow, what happened? Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's like they shot themselves in the foot by making it so cool. It's just like, you make it cool and then give us this as it unfolds in front of us. We're just kind of like, ugh.
I mean, I don't know what. I don't know if it's by design, and the point of it all is to make us realize how petty a lot of like disagreements are, or a lot of the bad things that people do to each other are just these like petty, stupid things that aren't well motivated.
Yeah.
If that's the lesson here, if that's like the grand idea, because I could see that kind of tying into some of the other larger things that happen this episode. The idea that a lot of this doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
And maybe you made it out to be a bigger deal than it was. But if so, I think I'm kind of reaching there. Yep. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you could extract something like that from it if you wanted, but the way it's presented isn't even particularly compelling. And we're kind of like, okay, so Tulip, I don't know. She's out for blood the whole season, and then all of a sudden she goes, I'm good.
Yeah, exactly. But it almost makes sense, because she's trying to light that fire under Jesse's ass.
She wants Jesse back, clearly, yeah, in like some state.
Yeah.
And mission accomplished, kind of. But even so, like by the end of the episode, which we'll talk about, but if you're listening, you've watched the episode, I hope.
Yeah.
They don't even really come around to that point again.
Yeah.
They leave it kind of like the heat's there a little bit, but nobody's acting on it.
Yeah.
No one's going for the fire extinguisher, but no one's taking dinner out of the oven either.
I want to say, then Jesse, like, as she stopped him from killing Carlos, he then is like, well, I'm going to do it anyway because it's going to feel good. Like, that to me was that's maybe my least favorite moment in this episode. It feels so completely out of left field. Like, it's like a switch flipped in Jesse that obviously must have happened during the Alamo standoff that went on in the church, but it just feels like it turns on its head so much, and it felt like I got blindsided by it a bit, but it might just be a personal thing.
No, I think you're right. I mean, Jesse definitely he definitely changes a lot over the course of, or over a very short amount of time. We spend the whole season with him trying to be good, and all of a sudden he's just kind of like, well, all right, whatever. I'm going to hell anyway. Like, I'm just going to start killing whoever I want to kill. And I know what you're saying. It's a little out of character. He's not really balancing his nature anymore. He's just going full like, whatever.
Yeah. So anyway, back to the episode. Tulip and Jesse let him go. We already talked about that. Then we cut back to Betsy. She's at the church explaining to the police that are posted there for church that morning that Jesse has put a spell on Donnie back at her house. And it turns out she was doing that to get the police away from the church so Jesse could go in and set up for his sermon.
The God reveal.
Yes, the reveal of God. Everybody cleans up the church. Jesse, Donnie, Tulip, and Betsy. And for some reason, Betsy's the one to show Jesse how the God phone works, which we both kind of remarked was kind of weird, and we're not really sure why. She seemingly knows about the weird technology that's inside of that thing, but I don't really know that there's much to it other than they just wanted somebody to kind of look closely at this cool prop that they made.
more just whatever writing, like, someone needs to figure it out.
Yeah,
why
exactly.
not her?
Yeah, so a little bit more laziness there, but it turns out that
unless she's in some way related to heaven, and we just don't know yet. Like unless she's
some
angel that's on earth and that's really into.
I guess that's true, but I'm just like, but why?
Yeah, I know.
So, but we do realize that then we are going to also see God instead of just hear him.
I feel like most of the series has been so careful with everything that it's laid out that for that much attention to be called to that character in that moment feels like it was by design.
It would, yeah, I guess that's true. I guess to me it would have made more sense.
Because if it just happens, just to be like, a character needed to figure it out.
I think it's something that we're going to forget by next season anyway, unless Bruce writes in and reminds us that it happened when there's no Betsy in season 2.
Never forget
Betsy. But I don't know. Like, it would have made more sense for Jesse just to kind of be like, hey, come take a look at this. And then they try and like if he was sussing it out and she was just kind of like, I don't know, then it would have made more sense.
He fumbles around with it for so long anyway. Like, why even bother? Why not just have him realize, like, oh, I didn't bother to figure this out, and then you just watch him like kind of screw around.
Yeah, it would almost make more sense if it was removed from the episode anyway. But
whatever.
All right. Now to Act 4, we got a full parking lot at All Saints Congregation. The sign says, "Today meet God, tomorrow TBD." It's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Tulip says, "No matter what, we're getting French fries afterwards." Cassidy stands by Tulip, and Emily explains to her daughter that Miles is meeting God somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
That darkness that Emily showed last week, I think, that was another weird point for me in terms of Jesse as well, kind of going ahead and killing everybody. I didn't see that coming out of Emily, and I didn't get a chance to talk about it, but maybe I'll come back to it next week. Everybody's in attendance. Tracy Loach is there. Her mother's prepping her hair. Jesse goes to start the sermon when Cannon interrupts him pretty hilariously.
Really good,
I loved that shot a lot. Kincannon explains the plan for today's sermon and then about his idea of the God of meat. And then Jesse pulls the phone out. They hook it up to call God, and you hear a modem handshake noise, which is really that
was hilarious.
That made me laugh really hard.
Yeah, that was great.
Jesse fumbles with it quite a bit, and Kincannon's ready to claim victory, but then the sky goes dark and God appears. What did you think of God? I was totally along for the ride with this scene, so much so that, like, when we get to the point where Kincannon stands up and is like, "Where's my, like, is my Betsy Lou with you? Like, is she up there?" And then he's like, "Yes." And then Kincannon's reaction, like, almost was an Alex's tears moment for me.
He stumbles back. He
stumbles back and sits back down, and I was just like, oh, like, I'm pretty sure I let that noise out when I watched it. But then I was like looking closer at God, and I was like, I think it's kind of funny that they made him look like the just basic impression of what everybody thinks God is, and like this gaudy white robe with a terrible white, like, it looked like a wig to me, and I didn't even think about what that meant. And then obviously we learned that it's not God. But
right.
What did you think of Matt Herlick's God?
Mark Herlick.
Mark Herlick.
Good old Mark Herlick.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. By the way, I would never have realized that was him. I didn't fall for it for very long because, and I have to tiptoe around this a little bit.
You knew this was coming, kind of. We talked about it a bit a couple weeks ago.
Did we, on the show?
Not on the show, but you and I talked about it.
Can I talk about it on the show?
Well, I think by the end of this episode, we can talk about a lot of what you said to me, and that the show is, like, the comic is really about Jesse trying to find God.
Yes.
And
we okay.
And that you eventually learn that God is not in power, like he's not up there anymore.
Right.
And I think that's what this is what we get illustrated in this episode.
Well, so I'm actually scratching my head right now thinking. I knew that if God showed up in the show, he would look really cool.
Okay.
And so as soon as this version of God shows up,
gaudy looking.
Well, and it looks like it's like project, like it's really hilarious.
It
looks like a hostage video that would be shot, or it's like really poorly done. And so it
looks like something made with like, what was the name of that program in school that you would use? Like the multimedia presentation before PowerPoint. Do you remember what it was?
No, I don't.
Oh God.
It's well, my initial as soon as it happened, I was like, oh wow, they're going there. Here's God. And then he was talking. What was his first quote? Why do bad things happen to good people? Was what the one
that
girl
was the
asked
first
him.
question.
And after his first answer, I just narrowed my eyes and I was like, okay, I know what's going on here.
Even he's like, you understand, and she's like, yeah.
But
why?
Yeah, which is great. Yeah. Okay. So Alex and I, after we recorded a few weeks ago, we had this really long conversation in which I kind of ruined / explained the whole main thrust of the Preacher comic, which is where this episode leaves us. That Jesse finds out God is not in heaven. The angels don't know where he is, and Jesse gets pissed and says God has a lot of shit down here to answer for.
Yeah.
So we're going to go find him and we're going to kick his ass is basically where it leaves it, which I think is great and really, really funny and interesting. And so based on the fact that I knew that already, that I was like, okay, God's not there. I either thought one of two things was happening. I thought either that is God and the budget really got sucked out the window and God doesn't know that Jesse has Genesis and then he's going to peace out. He's going to say, whoa, Genesis is gone?
Yeah.
You have Genesis?
Throws up his hands and walks away.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what I expected to happen. But then his answers to everything were so boilerplate, just like shitty, like back of prayer card answers to stuff that I was like, okay, this is a ruse. Plus, I know that a lot of the angel characters who are in the comics, and there's not a lot, like I've said earlier in our show, there's not a lot of interaction with heavenly beings in the books, but the ones they do interact with are total dipshits. And so I immediately was like, there's like 3 assholes behind this camera just telling him like,
stretch.
Yeah, that's good. Like giving it, and like just crappy fake beard.
Yeah.
Because they've already shown that like the angels in the show are kind of just yahoos anyway, and they're just kind of dumb and they're just kind of goofy. They're not these perfect beings that we think they are. Yeah, they're weird and they don't always know how to deal with humans. And so right as this scene was kind of rolling along, I was like, okay, this is just some dork up there like in a costume. It was really funny. It was, but it didn't take too long. But I think that's 100% my just knowledge of the book. Like I'll bet people who have read the comic who are watching this scene immediately kind of pretty quickly catch on to what's going on. But I would think. But that's what's so funny is there's that reaction shot of Betsy when Jesse says, "You're not God," and she's got her hand outstretched, and then she just kind of goes and just kind of lowers it, and it's really funny because I understand that's and it's fine. You know, this is not a criticism of religion or religious people whatsoever. But I understand the desire to get caught up in it and the way that people think, like when they feel like they're having an experience that is religious in nature, then they're going to exult in that, and they're going to love that feeling, and they're going to chase that feeling and really embrace it and hope and wish and dream that this is exactly what's happening to them, and they're not going to be able to control themselves.
Yeah,
and that's wonderful. Like that's if that is how people are, and that's how they choose to be, and that makes them live a better life and be better people. I'm all for it. But it's kind of funny and kind of mean in the show when they show Betsy with her hand outstretched, because in that moment, like they all believe it's God because they want it to be God so bad. It doesn't even matter if it is or not. Like they want it to be so much because they want to have answers to these questions, and even if they're really terrible answers, and they want to feel better about everything. And it's great because it's not in line with what happens in the comics, where Jesse basically calls them all out, and he's like, you guys roll up here every Sunday and you want to be forgiven, and then you just go do terrible things again. Because I guarantee if that had been God at the end of that episode, they would have gone back eventually to doing to doing bad things to each other, and because that's just human nature. And I just think that was kind of almost their way of just kind of examining that, because in this moment, the whole town, even Odin, is like, "Oh my God, the glory of God!" And then when they realize it's just some guy with like a wig and a crappy beard, and he gets carried away, and like a stupid hand covers the lens, which is like, how like crude is that? Cover the lens. Oh, it was awesome. That was so funny.
Yeah,
like that having him just melt on him, like, we don't know where he is.
Yeah,
God's gone.
I really liked
Then it got kind of scary. I was like, whoa, like that was really good.
Yeah,
an angel just being like kind of freaking out and like kind of losing it and being like, I mean, we see how the people react when they think there's no God, that God has abandoned his post. And then, just imagine how the angels feel.
Yeah.
Like it was great. Like I thought it was just a phenomenally done scene.
Yeah. I really enjoyed the moment when Jesse calls him out on like picking his nose. He was like,
I was scratching it.
And he's like, no, you weren't. And then he's like, I was. Jesus.
That
made me laugh really hard.
It was really funny. I mean, they did probably the hardest job they had in front of them was explaining the fact that, I mean, well, they have a lot of hard jobs. Even getting this show off the ground was a hard job. But explaining that God is not there and having an angel explain it, which is how it happens in the comics, and it's really funny too. And I actually texted you that panel in the book, and it's kind of the same way. Jesse uses the word on him, and he's like, "Cut the shit," because the angel shows up as this glorious, beautiful idea of what we all picture, like Sistine Chapel idea of an angel, and it comes on, it's like, behold the glory, and Jesse says, cut the shit, and it's like this little dumpy guy, and he's like, okay, and then like that's what he really looks like. And it's Fior or DeBlanc, it's one of them, it's one of the guys, just shows up to kind of confront Jesse, and then that's where Jesse gets all his answers. And in a comic, you can spit it out over 2 pages with like 12 panels. You can explain all this dialogue, and you as the reader go, oh, okay, and then you're off to the races. But in a show, I understand that they need a little more time with it. And so the building, this is a bigger thing that we're going to talk about in the next episode. And in this episode, I don't want to talk about the whole series, but this is one of the big challenges, I think, for them, was setting up this idea. And I didn't even know if they were going to go for it, truthfully. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of sacrilege going on in this show. There already was, but this episode is full tilt. Like, I kind of want to read some stuff about it to see, how it was received.
People are reacting to it.
Exactly.
I want to know how Ricky Maybe's mom feels about it. No.
Oh, yes.
If you listen to that Preacher Insider podcast. Yes. But
anyway, it was a great scene.
Yeah.
I thought it was very well done.
Yeah. I will say I started realizing when Jesse started realizing that it wasn't God, when Jesse's obviously asking
about Eugene.
About Eugene and using Genesis, I was like, okay, that's not God. That's about where, as a non-comic book reader, that's where I was like,
and that's by design. That's where the writing turns, and that's where yeah, for sure.
So God gets taken away by people in white suits, and Jesse, Tulip, and Cassidy just walk out of the church as Odin yells at Jesse to denounce God. Cassidy asks where they're going. Jesse says Tulip wants French fries. There were some pretty funny moments with Sheriff Root and the guy standing next to him.
Yeah, some nameless character.
But you can just kind of see after all this happens that everybody's kind of very disenfranchised about the whole thing. They're like, well, clearly this is all a sham. Even though it's really not.
It is really interesting watching how all the people react to the news.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, and it's honestly about what I would expect from
most of
the real world.
Yeah.
No, I mean, like, I feel like a lot of what we saw is a lot of what would happen.
Yeah.
I'd be really curious to have a really frank, honest conversation with like a hardcore atheist. Or which would be less in belief of a deity? Would it be agnostic or atheist? It'd be atheist.
Atheist, because an agnostic doesn't know, acknowledges that they cannot know if there's a God.
And say like, so if you found out definitively from heaven, like if there was once a God, and then they say like he's not here anymore, nobody's in charge. Would you feel just deep down, way down in the core, center of your being, would you feel a little tiny twinge of panic and be like, like, wow. You know,
Yeah.
I don't think I just can't. This is a whole other conversation for another time, and maybe not even in a public forum. But I think it's so hard for me to believe the idea that not everybody would in some way panic a little bit at that idea. You know what I mean? That there is truly, it's all chaos. You know what I mean? But Emily's reaction is really interesting.
So, well, real quick, we see Odin and his men ransacking the church. Odin cracks the cross off and then screams meat. And then, meat. So the start of the next act, it opens up on Emily explaining to her kids that nothing has changed, and the children, to her children, and even though God is missing, Daddy's still in heaven. And she says, we don't need God, and really we never did.
Right.
I think that's interesting. I think there'd be some people that would react that way. There's other people that
it was quite striking. I mean, coming from the organist.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, and the weird thing was, like, it's, I guess you kind of get the feel of it all that she really just was there for Jesse. In the end, maybe she really wasn't that much. I feel
like she was there before Jesse was, though.
You think so?
Like, I mean, probably. I guess I don't know for sure.
But I feel like her infatuation and involvement with it all was really with Jesse more so than. But
yeah, I have to go back and watch the season to really be able to tell because early on I thought like she was actually. It seemed like when Jesse came along, she had already been the organist, and obviously she took a liking to him. But she seemed like she genuinely cared about what she was doing.
Yeah,
but I'd like to watch it again now to find out for sure.
But just to run through all the things that the people are doing once they find out God has abandoned his post. The mascots are hanging themselves on the one dead tree that we've seen in Anvil. The little girls on the bus end up killing the pedophile bus driver. Mrs. Loach kills her daughter as her son takes a selfie, which I thought was particularly disgusting.
That was a little twisted. I don't truthfully. I'm not even sure that that joke even landed at all for me. Like I was kind of like, Mrs. Loach killing her daughter was really, really striking. Like that, I actually think I said "wow" out loud because I was like, "Wow!" Like that.
We could have dealt with that on its own.
That was very intense and very interesting, and I that stood. I mean, like even the two mascots hanging themselves next to each other. I didn't really think that was funny. I thought that was really sad. It's kind of, I mean, it's a little funny, and the way the guy dressed as a Native American kind of paralleled. It's the same tree that there were actual dudes hanging from back when.
I thought it was more interesting than like it's not. I don't think that like that section of the show is necessarily about being funny. Like obviously, I don't even necessarily want to say that the brother taking the selfie was supposed to be funny so much as it was just to kind of show you that these people are terrible. Like maybe. A lot of the people are terrible. Not that Mrs. Loach aside, I don't necessarily think that's terrible. But obviously, like either. The kid, like the brother's going to take a selfie. I would call that a terrible person.
Yeah, I really can't bring myself to believe any human being would actually do that. I don't pushed into cartoon territory for me.
Yeah. Other things that we see Root and his catatonic wife watching Tom Cruise's ashes being shot into space. Donnie lays in bed as Betsy is dressed up as Dorothy, kind of disappointed that it seems like she's lost Donnie again, which I didn't really totally understand. I guess Jesse's interaction with Donnie in the men's room maybe ultimately led him back to believing God was there.
Well, I think that Donnie probably believed that Jesse was, he's a holy man. He's a preacher. He believes in God, and God is what makes Jesse able to forgive like that. And I think, like I said, I think that's the kind of thing, the direct interaction with heaven that God has left. I think that would shake most people in the town.
That's true. That's true.
And Donnie has become recently more contemplative. I mean, look, he's reading Gorillas in the Mist in bed.
Odin consoles a meat version of his daughter wrapped up in the winter coat.
That was awesome.
I guess that would be between the things that are funny. I would say the Tom Cruise thing that still gets funny. Me.
Yeah.
And I think the meat puppet is sad and funny. Like it's just kind of like,
there's a big meat thing with Odin.
Yeah.
In the comic, and I think that was kind of their way.
They actually talked about that on Talking Preacher.
Oh, did
afterwards.
they? Okay.
Yep.
I think that was kind of their way of somewhat representing
that's what
that.
Seth Rogen said.
Okay.
He's like, it's terrible that we would connect these two things in that way, but
no, I thought it was well done.
Yeah.
No, the one in the comic is just disgusting.
Yep.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
They talk a lot about it. Indeed, they tell you
he explained. So if you haven't, if you have watched Talking Preacher, then you know what's going on, what we're talking about. And then finally, we see that the pressure relieving man is potentially dead from like a heart attack while having sex with a prostitute.
Banged one out.
Yeah, and because clearly his wife wasn't reciprocating, and the prostitute's trying to relieve the pressure or stop the alarms, and she's unsuccessful. And a cigarette that was over by the dead tree ends up lighting the whole town aflame and wiping Anvil off the map, pretty much.
Yep.
So, I just want to toot my own horn and say that I did end up calling that when we had the same conversation about you telling me everything. I was like, I think I know what we're building towards.
Yeah, that was really clever. I told Alex that in the first issue of the comic, we see the church explode, and he was like, oh. And I said, I'm kind of, would love to see that. And then he started to connect the gas and everything. And it was really well done. Toot that horn, buddy.
So Anvil's blown up. Everybody's gone.
Yes, and it's not just the church. Yeah, Anvil is there's like a sinkhole starts to open up under the by the church. You see the earth start to just crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy. And at first I was like, okay, so just a certain area blew up, and then, we can walk back around to that. The final act of the show, Act 6, Fiore gets dropped off where he was picked up with his luggage still there, and he made it out, but it appears that DeBlanc did not make it out. You guys asked this question at the end, but I forget who fell on what side. Did you guys think he was... I think we both thought he was dead.
Yeah. I didn't get that impression until I heard you guys talk about it.
It sets up a very important...
And then I got really sad.
Lesson. The Saint of Killers.
He kills you and
you're dead. He kills to kill,
yeah.
He is the ultimate killing machine.
Yeah.
So now we can call him what he is. He's the Saint of Killers. They haven't called him that yet on the show.
Yeah, they didn't call him that on the show, but he was called that on Talking Preacher and in other features and on the Twitter account and stuff like that.
They'll call him that in season 2. They'll start to explain who he is.
Yeah.
I'm so excited for that. And we'll talk more about it next week, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But it's great. But yes, the one lesson you can take away is it is the golden gun.
Yes.
You don't come back from that.
Yep. All right, and then we cut to Jesse, Cassidy, and Tulip kind of meta commenting on the end of the season while actually talking about the ending of The Big Lebowski. I thought that was fun.
Yep.
I hope that's the end of the Big Lebowski conversation, kind of, but it was funny. Like the third time's the charm.
Yeah, it was good.
Tulip asks what the plan is, and Jesse says the plan is simple: find God. We're going to go out and actually find God. What are you going to do when you find him? If God wants our help, we'll help him. If he doesn't, we're going to kick his ass.
Beautiful.
You were like, oh, I hope he says kick his ass.
Yeah, I do.
And then he did.
It's just funny. It's so crude, but it's perfect. It's exactly, that's Jesse from the comic. He's just this like Southern gent that's like, God's been a bad guy, and if I got to whoop his ass to tell him he was wrong, that's what I'm going to do. Like he wants to just give him a spanking, basically. It's really awesome. Just tell him like you did a bad thing. You hit him on the nose with a rolled up newspaper, and then just tell him to straighten it out and do better next time. Great.
Then we see them walking out of the diner. Jesse promises a hallucination of Eugene that he's going to find a way to get him out of hell.
Sad.
And the three leave the diner just as the news report explains what happened in Anvil and that nobody's alive. Tulip, I did want to say really quick about Eugene. I did read something on Reddit really briefly. We've talked about John Wayne in the past. I don't know if we made the connection that maybe Eugene is the John Wayne of the comic.
Yes.
The hallucination of Eugene will be the conscience for Jesse in the way that John Wayne kind of is in the comics.
That is really good. Yep,
yeah.
Totally.
So props to whoever on Reddit, on the Preacher subreddit, said that. That was pretty great.
That is good.
And then, although I would like to see a ghost John Wayne, I'd be okay with that.
You know what? There's room in some story that has yet to be told for ghost John Wayne to show up.
All right, so good. Good to know. Tulip finally asks Jesse about Genesis, what it is. Jesse shows her by forcing her to kiss him, and then she hits him in the face and says, never do that again. And then they're all sitting in the car looking in the camera with their sunglasses on. And what am I trying to say? Joe Gilgan. Cassidy's got his red shades on, yes, which you were happy about.
I was very happy.
Just like in the comics. And then he says, what are you waiting on? As Tulip punches the gas and they get going on their road trip.
Yep, and they even say a road trip. It's great.
Yep.
That's, I mean, the beginning of the first page of the comic, the three of them are sitting in a diner together and they're recounting what happened.
Yeah.
And by the end of the first issue, you've watched this whole season.
Yeah.
Kind of, in a way.
All right, and then the final scene, we see the Seraphim walking in the ruins of Anvil when a hole is blown through her, and we see that the cowboy is on Earth. And he says, preacher. That's the end of the episode. I'll say, my first viewing of this episode, I was kind of unhappy with it. It seemed like a lot happened, and that I wasn't happy with kind of the tonal shifts with Jesse. And just, it felt very all over the place to me. I think it was the compound of a strange character shift for Jesse, a big disappointment in Carlos, and just the really wacky interaction with fake God, or Fod as we like to call him. All of that together, it disarmed me in a way, and I wasn't happy about it. But the second viewing of it, I think, really solidified it all for me, and I enjoyed it a lot more, actually. What did you think?
I liked it. I didn't like the first bit so much because it felt like we were playing catch up.
Yeah.
It felt like a last week on, but we didn't see last week's episode.
Yeah.
And after that, though, I mean, I really like how they brought it around to where the comic starts. And I remember after you and I watched the first episode of the pilot, I was like, oh, God, they better not spend all season in Anvil. I said, I hope the church blows up by like episode 5.
And I think I told you, I was like, maybe they'll spend this season getting us there.
Yep. And I'm happy that they went that route now.
Yeah.
I think we had a really great season. If it had not been renewed for a second season, I probably would be a little more irritated.
You'd be pretty...
But at the same time...
I could totally understand
At the same time, I kind of wouldn't, though, because it's all a prequel to the comic then, in that sense, because now's the time when they can really screw it up, and I might be like, oh, God.
That's what I was thinking about. I was like, man, season 2 is going to be a whole new beast.
It is, absolutely. It's going to be a different show in every way. So it's that's exciting. I liked it though. I liked where it wound up for the most part. I mean, there are definitely some bumps. Carlos was I think almost can be classified as a misstep.
Yeah.
Like in the whole idea of the whole subplot of Carlos. But I haven't had a lot of time to sift through it yet. I think for next week I'll probably have better notes on how this one ended. It's like you and I said before the episode started. I said there's not that much to talk about because we're not driving towards anything anymore.
Exactly, yeah.
It's all over. It's all almost, in a way, it's all almost falling action, even though it's pretty explosive ending. But I mean, so everyone's dead. I think the whole cast. Emily's dead. Odin's dead.
That's what seems insane. And
the Loaches are dead. Sheriff Root's dead. Like everyone's dead.
I definitely want to ask you guys next week. What do you feel about the fact that everybody that we cared about is now gone? You know, I think it's most of the people that we care about are now gone.
In a way, it's kind of hysterical. It's almost like the ultimate, like, don't get too attached to any characters.
Yeah.
We might just blow up the whole town.
Yeah. Eat your heart out, George R. R. Martin.
Yeah.
But
honestly, that's about all I have to say for now. Until next week. I got to mull it over, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the whole package.
Absolutely. So come back next week. We'll be here with Lance and John to talk about the whole season. And we'd like to hear from you. So you can do that by emailing us g2tpodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Twitter, g2tpodcast. And g2tpodcast.com, that's the letter G, number 2, letter T, podcast.com, has all of our previous episodes. We're also on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and Google Play Music. If you do email us, tell us what you think of our show and share your thoughts on AMC's Preacher so we can read them on air. Send us corrections, observations, anything regarding Preacher or our podcast. And please rate and review our podcast on iTunes. The more you do that, the more people will find us, and the more likely we will be to continue this show. And it'll make us very happy, and it would be great. So please rate and review us on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you listen to us. Tell your friends. All the new people that are going to pick up Preacher in the off season, please let them know that we are here, and let them know that they should give us a listen. If you want to hear Nick and I talk about about film with a few other friends, be sure to check out the Midwest Film Nerds podcast at MidwestFilmNerds.com. Because some of you might not listen next week, we do recommend, if you miss us in the off season, come check us out there. This week we're going to talk about Netflix's Stranger Things and the Jason Bourne film that came out this past weekend. And also, if you want to hear some of us talk about video games, John's on that show and I'm on it most of the time as well. That's the Midwest Game Nerds podcast. Check it out at MidwestGameNerds.com. Our theme music is the song All In by The Red Thread. It's being used under non-commercial Creative Commons license. And once again, go forth and speak the good word.